Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show that takes place right here, in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Pete Wissinger.
And I'm Brendan Hansen.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
And today, we're going to sink our roots deep into one of the biggest games, I think, published in the last decade. And that is Leader Games, Cole Wehrle's, Kyle Ferrin's Root, an asymmetric war game that leans heavily on Euro mechanisms to create a dramatic experience at the table for all of its players. This is an incredible game, Pete, and I'm really excited to do a classic deep dive. We don't have any other topic that we're going to talk about today. It's just Root all day today, Root all day tomorrow, Root all day. Wait, no, just maybe 2 episodes. But we're at least going to go really deep today on the original base factions, the 4,
Correct.
the box as it was published to retail initially.
Correct. So what you all can expect is that today's episode is just going to kind of be a deep dive into Root as a system and a deep dive into its shared decision space, and then an exploration as to how the 4 factions that come in the base box have their own unique decision spaces within that system.
Cool. So that's the Cats, the Eyrie Dynasty, the Hawks, the Vagabond, which we'll talk about some of that. There's a lot of what that means. That's a lot of things, but it's one thing, but it's a lot of things. And then also the Woodland Alliance.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
But before we get into this deep dive that I am beyond jazzed about, just want everyone to know we talked about this last episode, but we do want to do a listener questions episode here in the next week or two. So we're taking questions in 3 different places. First, if you're a patron of the show, there is a post for you to comment on with a question, and patron questions are going to be prioritized, not as a, we're not trying to sell you on anything, but that is just how it is.
That's a cool perk.
It is a perk. Secondly, you can join our Discord if you're not a member already, and there is a thread in the Ask Us Anything section of that. And then the third option is if you want to send us an email. We do occasionally check our email, and we will make a point to check that email before that episode. And the email will be in the show notes.
Yeah, and it's decisionspa@gmail.com, and it will be in the show notes. Boom. Okay, also, no one's reviewed Decision Space on Apple Podcasts in a long time. Those reviews do a lot for our show in terms of discoverability. So if Pete wasn't selling you on joining our Patreon, I'm selling you on leaving a review if you enjoy Decision Space. We love reading them out on the show. I'd love to have the opportunity to do that for you and your thoughts on us. So consider it. Thank you so much. Okay, Root.
All right,
Root,
are you ready to dive into the woodland, Brendan?
I'm so ready. I can't decide who I want to play as, but yeah.
All right. Well, where would we start?
I think we should start in 2018 and a little bit of game history. No, we should start with our own reviews, because our own reviews, I think, are a helpful touch point for listeners of Decision Space to know what we're bringing to this conversation, right? How we feel about the game is going to inform our discussion of the Decision Space, which is what the show is really about. But we want you to know what we think of the game too. So we're going to start with our reviews, and then we're going to go into game overview, a little light rules overview. So if you've never played Root, you still have a reason to listen to this, and we'll dive deep on the Decision Space, what this game offers, what sets it apart, what it's like to feel this game, what really distinguishes it. So Pete, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I think people already know how I feel about Root, so we'll get that bias out of the way first. This is because if you've listened to the show before, I talk about it a lot, and I listed it as my number 1 favorite game of all time when we did our top game countdown episode. And I would actually say that Root has been my favorite game since the first Kickstarter showed up at my door. It was one of the earliest Kickstarters that I backed. And Root just has actually shaped my taste in board games because I connected with it so much. And in 2018, I'd only really been seriously board gaming for maybe about 2 years at that point. And Root really showed me a lot of possibilities for what board games could do. It's a 10 out of 10 game for me because it is one of the most interactive experiences that I have ever had in a board game. It's fiercely competitive. It's bursting with charm and character in its presentation. And it is still to this day, I think, the game that has done asymmetry the best out of any asymmetric game I've played. I feel like most asymmetric games, the asymmetry is maybe an asymmetric power or something slight. And Root is really not like that. That um, it every faction plays in a very unique way, but I think what makes it extra special is that every faction plays in a unique way using the same language of the game system as every other faction. It's not an I think some people imagine they've said, "Oh, Root is a game where everyone's playing their own game." And I actually don't think that's true about Root. I think that it is very much everyone playing the same game, using the same language and the same actions, and it does it in such a way that somehow is still accessible and understandable for players. I think that it is actually a masterpiece of board game design. And for me, it is as good as it gets. If I only could play one game, and this is huge for me to just go and get this bias out early. If I could only play one game for the rest of my life, I would choose Root.
Root's a good choice for that. There's a lot of game in this box. Okay, so favorite game of all time from Pete. This is an incredible endorsement. Here's mine. So, Pete, as Shakespeare asserted in As You Like It, all the world's a stage. And in the small woodland world of Root, all the game is a stage too. Cole Worley's Root is a production. Players are cast in their respective roles, and while their lines aren't dictated or written in advance, mechanically, the relationships between players and the factions are. Root is a wargame drama with Euro mechanics as set pieces. It's bombastic, unfair, unwieldy, demanding, and delightful. Kyle Farron's art and overall presentation takes a great game and makes it one people will remember and discuss for decades to come. Root is far from perfect, but its aesthetic experience, both in play and presentation, is so clear that I find its rough spots charming. 9.5 out of 10. Root's just this, it's just in a kind of iconoclastic game. Root is one of the games published in the last 10 years that I really think people will know about, care about, talk about 30 years from now.
It's so funny. We both mentioned the presentation, and I know that this podcast and its deep dives is typically not so much focused on aesthetics of games.
Yeah.
But I really think that it is a huge element of Root's success. I mean, I think that whenever I backed this game, it was in part because of the art presentation. I think there's something about growing up on Disney's Robin Hood and Redwall books that just primes you to be drawn into this game in such an inviting way. And while I think that this game would be super sharp if it didn't have this theme or didn't
Mhm.
have this presentation, it is undoubtedly enhanced by that.
Yeah. I think the theme also is really helpful. There's things like the hawks being war hawks, the cats being in conflict with the birds at the table that just help a player to mechanically hook in. But I'll also say, Pete, and like you said, we probably won't dwell on the art a lot. We could do probably a whole episode on
Oh yeah.
Kyle Farron's art, but it would be a disservice to Root as a product, Root as a game, which it's a game and a product, to not talk about the fact that I really do think Kyle Farron's art takes a game that is really good. It's a great game and just makes it something so much more than it ever could have been in the marketplace without it. And that's really important because games are what they are presented as. And Root asks a lot of its players, right? In the base box, there's this shared language that you mentioned in your review, but there really are four very different ways to play this game that if you want to play it even well-ish, you kind of need to intimately understand what everyone's trying to accomplish because their objectives are going to inform the decisions that they're making, but also how you can incentivize them to do what you want them to do at the table, which is really important in a political stage play that is Root. And if it asks a ton, what it gives you back is this incredible art to draw you in and say, no, 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 we love this game. We've invested in this game and it's worth your time too. And I wish more board game publishers would understand that a game, when it asks this much of its players, has to give a lot. And it has to give a lot up front too to open the door. And Root gets that so right.
It's very true. And I also think that Root is a game that tells stories, but those stories are made so vibrant because of the theming and the art. Like, you know, my friends and I would, whenever I first got Root and we were playing it almost every week, we're in our group chat, like telling the story of last night's Root game. And
Mhm.
just the idea that, there were these, murderous mice that were just blowing up the fortresses of these industrialist cats, right? It creates a world without telling you a narrative. And
Yeah.
I think that a lot of times when people think about stories in games, they're thinking of stories that are written on a page for someone to read out loud to the table. And Root is a game that tells stories, but it's a story that's told through play. And it's a story that the players envision for themselves with the pieces that they're given rather than being told a story.
And I think that one really important thing about that, and what I was trying to get at in my review, Pete, is I really do think it's a game that casts its players as characters in a story that it's setting up, right? We don't have broad agency to do whatever we want as the cats. There's a pretty specific role that we're going to fulfill at the table. When I'm playing the Woodland Alliance, I can't be an aggressive military faction because there's mechanical constraints to the playing the Woodland Alliance. I only have 10 meeples that I can put on the board. I have 10 warriors. And I probably don't want all 10 of those because I probably want some of those to be officers. So I have to get them out of the field so I can actually do things with the warriors that I have on the table. So I'm gonna be scrappy. I'm gonna have fewer pieces than everyone else. But in my agency, I can destroy everyone else's pieces. So I can make them scared if I revolt in a clearing and blow their stuff up, right? Already a story of dynamics of power are at play when I'm sitting across from you, the cat, or you, the eyrie player. I'm weak compared to you. If you're the cat, you start with pieces all over the board, right? But I can blow your stuff up. And there's a story that emerges out of that. And then the arc of that story, I think, varies from root game to root game and from depending on the faction mix as well. But more or less, I think if the same characters are in play, you kind of get a similar story because of the mechanical dynamics that are there. And I don't mean that it's always the same, but I think that because you are cast in a role, you sort of end up having a relationship to every player that informs how that game goes in a way that I think is a huge accomplishment for Root and really illustrates the power of asymmetric games. So that's what I want to talk about more later in this
Yeah.
episode too.
Let me get a little bit into like the history of the game's
Yeah,
design just
yeah,
to
yeah.
give, because you're talking about these kind of political relationships that the game casts players into.
Mhm.
So this game is the second title from this publisher, Leader Games. Their first title was something called Vast, which
Yep.
was an even more asymmetric game that was designed by the head of the studio, Patrick Leader. And uh, Cole Wehrle essentially responded to a job posting that they were looking for someone to work on um, a game on game design. Up to that point, Cole Wehrle had designed 3 historical games. He designed a game called Pax Pamir, which built upon the Pax system. He designed a game called John Company, and he designed a game called An Infamous Traffic. So basically, his whole background was in historical wargaming in terms of design. He's someone who played all kinds of games. And his main piece of inspiration for Root was a series of war games by Volko Runke called the Coin series, which I assume you're familiar with the Coin series, Brendan.
Yeah, yeah.
And so
What's coin
Coin,
stand for?
yeah, I was about to get to that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So Coin stands for counterinsurgency.
yeah.
And Volko Runke actually has a background in actual wargaming for the government. He's someone who like would design simulation war games for the military. So counterinsurgency wargaming is literally something he has a professional background in. And
Which are
so
really
he
about
made,
power dynamics.
for sure, and about the different ways that different actors sort of put pressure
Yeah.
in a conflict.
Sure.
And so he designed the first one was one called Andean Abyss. He made
Mhm.
one called Cuba Libre, and it's a pretty large series. And what the Coin series is known for is having very asymmetric factions that each have their own unique victory condition on a shared board. The only one of these I've played is Cuba Libre. And in Cuba Libre, basically every player has their own victory condition. And there's these tangled relationships between the players where, the last time I played, represented the government, and I was kind of allied with my friend who was cast as basically the mob. And his goal was just to open casinos and make money. And
Mhm.
my goal was to essentially maintain support for my government. And we could scratch each other's backs in that situation. So that's the sort of game that Coin is. It has its own unique card system that is the thing that is shared across Coin games. But Root was inspired by Coin, but is not literally a Coin game. But when I say it's inspired by Coin, the factions in Root are coded as either militant factions or insurgent factions. And the militant factions represent large power within the game. And the insurgent factions represent essentially more of a grassroots kind of power, like more bottom up, less top down. And
So
um,
in what we're talking about today, the Cats and the Eyrie dynasty are the two military factions, and the Vagabond and the Woodland Alliance are the two insurgent factions.
Correct. And as we talk about the game, you'll see how there are sort of historical parallels to what these represent within the game. That Root is not itself a historical war game, but it speaks a lot of the same language as historical war games. And these cute animal factions um, definitely have real world analogs at various points in history. And when it comes to the theming of the game, what Cole Wehrle actually has talked about is that a game that was really popular around the time he was developing Root was Blood Rage. And he always thought Blood Rage was funny because the box looks like this big, mean, nasty, bloody war game. And then you play it and it's just kind of a Euro game. And he's like, well, what if we made a game that looks
Really
cute,
cute.
but is
Yeah.
actually the meanest, nastiest game? And it sort of flips that expectation on its head.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that is a huge reason why it was so successful. And it was kickstarted and was a big hit on Kickstarter, but has continued to be a big hit every time they have added expansions. And I'll say, while
Mm.
Cole Wehrle was the original designer of Root, it is no longer, I would say today, Cole Wehrle's game. That the future expansions have been designed by other people within the studio. Josh Yearsley is a developer and editor for Leader Games, and he's totally the lead designer on the next expansion that is uh, currently nearing the end of its development cycle. So it is become the flagship game of a company. I mean, this is the title that built Leader Games
Yeah.
and continues to be the backbone of that company.
Have you played Vast?
I've not played Vast. It's in fact the only Leader game I've not played.
Mm. I listened to a podcast with Patrick Leader shortly after Vast came out. He was on Ludology, and it was an awesome episode. And in Vast, you sort of take on the role of either a cave, a dragon, I think it's
An
like goblins.
adventurer, and
Yeah,
then
an
yeah, right.
adventure or goblins. And yeah, I think that it's really cool. Leader Games is a company sort of made around this idea that we will only make asymmetric games, and to have, you know, it's sort of like A New Hope
I would actually
and
say
then
that's not true.
Empire
That's
Strikes
where
Back.
I would say that's where
They've
they
strayed from
made
there.
they have, yeah.
Okay.
So Arcs is not really an asymmetric game. Oath is not really an asymmetric game. I think that's how they
I
definitely
think
made
that's
a
how they
name for
started.
themselves.
Yeah.
Well, their first two games
The
were
idea. Yeah.
incredibly asymmetric.
Yeah. Is
So I think they
Ahoy?
started with that. Ahoy is as well,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
But then
Okay.
they made a deck builder called Fort, which is
Fort.
not
Yep.
asymmetric. But
But adorable.
oh, the
Yeah.
art is great in that game.
Yeah. Okay. Should we teach people how to play Root so we can talk about Root? The conversation
Yeah.
you and I have been dying to have for like,
Here's what's funny
yeah.
about teaching Root is one thing you'll hear a lot of people say is they'll say, I like Root, but I hate teaching it. And that's because it is a little bit of a daunting experience, because what people say is that you don't have to just know how your faction works. You have to know how everyone at the table's faction works.
Yeah.
But I actually like teaching Root, and I would say if you really are expecting that level of learning of Root, then the actual time it takes to learn Root is about 4 games of Root.
Mm.
Like it's like that you are learning Root your first X number of times you play it. But I think that the way to teach Root and to let people know the rules of Root is to understand kind of the basics of the game, what everyone shares in common, and what the goals of the game are. So I'll start by just saying that Root is an asymmetric war game where the goal is to be the first player to get 30 points. There are various ways that you get points. Each faction has unique ways that it scores points, but then there's also a couple ways that everybody scores points. Players take actions going through essentially a schedule. You have what's called bird song, which is the first part of your turn. You then have, is it, oh my gosh, is it day? Why
Daylight?
do I, daylight, yes. And then evening. But really what that is it's literally just a list you go down as you play. And what those different times of day are is it's just sort of like a point of no return. And um, the kind of main actions that everyone has is you can move your pieces from one clearing to another. I should say that Root is a board made up of these nodes called clearings that are connected by roads called paths. And there's also a river running through the board. The base game of Root comes with 2 boards. It's got a forest map on one side and a winter map on the other side. And so moving is one of the main actions. In order to move, you must rule a clearing, which just means having the most pieces. Another main action is to battle. Battles in the game are incredibly simple. You literally roll 2 dice, and the attacker gets the bigger number, and the defender gets the smaller number. Um, Another thing that every faction can do is craft. There is a deck of cards in the game that you can craft for points or for special abilities. And lastly is building things that every faction, for the most part, either has tokens or buildings that you put on the board. One of the main ways that you score points in the game is that anytime you destroy a building or token that belongs to another player, you get a victory point. And this is why battles are often a way that every faction in the game is going to get victory points. There's a deck of cards in the game that has 4 suits. 3 of the suits, rabbits, foxes, and mice, represent the clearings because the clearings on the map in Root are also colored and suited so that they match up with the deck. And the game uses that in a lot of different ways. And then there's a 4th suit of cards called the birds, and the birds are essentially a wild suit. And so the way that you play Root is that you're going to do whatever your faction needs to do to get to 30 points by taking these move, battle, build actions in addition to doing whatever special thing your faction specifically does to get points in addition to that. So
Awesome.
that's it. That's how you play Root, right?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's the game. That's very much
Listen,
what
I
we need
just
to know.
taught all these people how to play Root. So
And I think for the sake of this conversation specifically, can we, and we're being facetious, obviously. I hope listeners, we're being facetious. But I think we should also, I know we're going to get into each faction a little bit more in depth and talking about the decision space inherent to them. But I think as we're teaching the game as it exists in this sort of base experience, we should characterize each of them really quickly here. Is that okay?
sure, that's fine.
Okay. So the cats are the military industrialists. So they're unique because they have the most meeples, most pieces, most soldiers, most warriors that can ever be on the board, 25. Maybe they're tied with another faction in an expansion, but that's how it starts in the base game. And they start with pieces on almost every clearing or in every clearing, depending on if you use various setups. But they have lots of pieces on the board. They start in control of the woodland. And they are playing an industrial sort of economic engine building game where they're trying to build these sawmills, and they're also trying to build workshops that will let them craft cards based on the clearing those workshops are built in, but also recruiters, which will help them put more pieces out on the board. So really what they want to do is build. They want to build things, and they want to move to new clearings, control those clearings, and build more things. That's how they get points. And I say that's how they get points because that's a really important piece of Root. How do you get points? And then how do you stop your opponents from getting points? Which sounds basic, but I think when you play Root, there's so much going on that you can at times lose track of what you're trying to do as your faction. And the cats are trying to build buildings. They want to build sawmills so they get more wood so they can build more stuff. Do you want to do a faction
For
LP?
sure.
So take
Yeah.
turns.
So
Yeah.
the Eyrie dynasty is basically playing an action programming game. So the Eyrie dynasty represents sort of thematically this kind of old ancestral kingdom.
Yeah.
And in the game, you choose a leader to be. And then every turn, you are adding one of your suited cards to a piece of your action programming. And you must perform your decree in the order that it is essentially on your player board. And the main thing you're
Recruit, move,
doing.
fight, build, right?
Yes, and yeah, so you're moving, you're recruiting, you're fighting, and you're building, and the main way you get points is by building, because at the end of your turn, you will gain victory points based on how many buildings you have on the board. Now, the big twist of the Eyrie dynasty is that if you ever cannot take one of the actions in your decree, you go into turmoil. All of your actions in your action programming are thrown in the discard pile. You lose points for any of the wild cards that were in there. You pick a new leader and you basically start from scratch, but your board position remains. And so they are playing this game of essentially telling the whole table what they're doing every turn and then having to perform it. And everyone else's job is basically to throw a wrench in there so that they turmoil and are forced to take that reset turn.
Yeah. Awesome.
So
They're really cool. They're very Euro game, the Hawks, I would say.
it's so funny you keep
The Erie.
saying that there was all this Euro influence, because I
I think they're
really don't
it
think about Root being very Euro.
I think that there's the Euro mechanisms are like the salt on everything else going on with Root, so you don't notice it, but it undergirds everything, and it's the reason why this game was like a breakout crossover hit, is that there's footholds for someone who's never played a war game to sink into and get what you're supposed to be doing, such that you have this identity to lean into. And I say that because of there's things like okay, so the Woodland Alliance. I think also the Woodland Alliance is tricky. So I talked already about so these are the rebels of what's going on here. They're sort of thematically they're actually the mice, foxes, and rabbits that are shown on each of the clearings. So they're supposed to just be the sort of commoners who are rising up against the cats and the Eyrie dynasty, who are sort of Pete, you mentioned the Erie dynasty as these sort of warlike aristocrats that maybe have existed for a long time. They were in control of the forest before the cats came and sort of took control of things. But the Woodland Alliance just sort of is like, to heck with these tyrants, the power to the people. And the Woodland Alliance starts with no pieces on the board. So that is stark. As a player of the Woodland Alliance, when you look down and you see that you have no pieces on the board compared to the cats everywhere, you feel something. Typically you feel not very powerful, but your goal, how you're going to get points is you're going to spread sympathy. When you spread sympathy on the board, there are these tokens that you can add that make it such that if someone moves into that clearing, they have to give you cards. And if they fight your sympathy, they have to give you cards. And they give you cards to some supporters, the special area of your board called supporters that you're going to use to spread more sympathy. Layered on to all of this is that once you spread sympathy somewhere, you're going to try to establish a base there. And that base is going to give you more resources. It's going to give you more cards every turn. And you can use those cards to potentially do other things. So you're sort of playing an engine building game because you want to spread sympathy to slow everyone else down. Then you want to get a base down to get more cards in your hand. Then maybe you want to get another base down so you get even more cards, which helps you get more supporters out, which helps you spread more sympathy. And the Woodland Alliance is essentially playing the underdog game. They're not as powerful as the cats or the birds to start, but they're trying to build this snowball that they can roll down the hill and maybe end the game by scoring 12 points more than a third of their points in one turn. They want to have this explosive finish where they are crafting some, because they have pretty good crafting if they've spread a lot of sympathy. They want to spread a lot of sympathy all at once, both in the normal way they do, but they can also use their warriors. And the Woodland Alliance is cool because a lot of their actions happen at night, especially after they've established bases, which makes sense for a rebel faction. And they're going to send their warriors out into these different clearings, and they're going to, oh, what's it called? The word is really cool.
When they turn a warrior into a sympathy?
Yeah.
It's called, I don't remember. I should have gotten my player boards out while we did this episode so I could use the actual terms.
Totally. They basically sacrifice themselves, or they lay down their arms, depending on how you want to look at it. But they spread sympathy. You can turn a warrior into sympathy, so that you can read that in a lot of different ways. And I think that Root sort of presents itself to be read in lots of different ways based on how you're looking at it.
The verb is organize, by the way.
Organize. Okay, so I think that's cool.
It's really funny to talk about that verbiage, though, because I've listened to so many podcasts of Cole Wehrle talking about board game design. And one thing he's talked about is something to pay attention to in your board games is what are the verbs of your game?
For sure.
And the verbs of your game tell you so much about the type of game that you're making.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Like
here the verbs are really move, battle, build in
sure.
in its most basic level.
For the shared version. And craft. Let me do the last faction real quick, because I do want to like hit each of these in a deeper way. But the last one is the, let's say, the controversial faction of the game, which is the Vagabond. But I think the Vagabond is also the special sauce that I think attracts people to the game. Because if you play as the Vagabond in Root, you are literally one meeple, and you will never be more than one meeple.
Yeah.
And you are kind of playing an adventure game in the middle of everybody's war game. They've got a couple of main things they do. Kind of some of their main actions are aid, which is literally to just give some of your cards to other players, and you get points for that. Another thing you can do is go on quests. And then another thing you can do is to fight. But what's unique about the action economy of the Vagabonds is that whenever people craft items for victory points in Root, those items are used by the Vagabond to take all of their actions. And there's also these ruins on the board that do nothing unless the Vagabond's in the game. Because if the Vagabond's in the game, they can explore a ruin to find an item. And so they're playing this action economy game where they're trying to collect as many items as they can. And so that they, as one little meeple, actually have a lot of potential to move around the board and do a bunch of different things. But they have individual relationships with every other faction in the game. They might be friendly with some factions. They might be enemies with some factions. And they get a lot of points from battling the faction that they are enemies with. They also can slip into the forests, which are the spaces between the clearings and paths. They're the only faction in the base game that gets to utilize that space at all. And they are controversial because they represent a lot of chaos in the game, and they can get a lot of points. And they're the only faction in the game that you don't get victory points for attacking, because they don't have any buildings for you to destroy or any tokens for you to destroy. And so one of the core questions of Root is, when is somebody going to hit the Vagabond?
Because it's like eating your vegetables or doing your homework. Like, you don't get credit. I mean, for homework, you get credit. But for eating your vegetables, you don't get any credit. It's just something someone has to do. Otherwise, they're going to pass you.
If we're talking about the decision space of Root, which, first of all, if we're going to characterize this decision space, I would say it would have to be a dynamic decision space, right?
100%, because Root is really so many different games that share a system. In some ways, I think you can look at it that way. But can I say one more thing about the Vagabond, and then we can characterize the decision space? Because I think what you said is really important, and it's a really hard thing to wrap your mind around if you haven't played Root. So I want to say it again. You said it quickly, which is great because you love this game. Every card in the game has a suit on it, and some of those cards have items on them that have points associated with crafting them. Every faction in the game can in some way craft, but the rules of how they craft is different for every faction. But every faction can craft those cards. On those cards show tokens, like swords or tea or coins or hammers that you can craft. And for the player who's crafting them, mostly what you care about is the points that are on them. So if I'm the cats and I craft a sword for 2 points, I'm happy because I scored 2 points, but I've put a sword into the game that if the vagabond trades with me, they can just take from me. And now all of a sudden, I got 2 points, but I also gave the vagabond a really big stick to hit everyone with at the table.
Or
And that's a
you.
meaningful stick. Or probably me, because I'm probably playing the cats and they were probably my friends until I gave them a stick and now they're going to hit me. But what the reason why I wanted to make this point, Pete, so please forgive me for interrupting you,
No,
really good
go.
segue, is that Root is a game where the design starts with what are the relationships between players at the table. And I think that's when you say the Vagabond is the secret sauce, the Vagabond is the one character that makes this explicit. It says, what are your relationships with players at the table? Are you friendly with them? Do you want to aid them and give them cards? Do you want to try to pick a player to make the person who you're helping a lot? What does that look like for your game? Who's your enemy? Who are you hostile with? You should fight them. And it gives you mechanical reasons to do these things. Mostly it gives you mechanical reasons to fight people as the vagabond. Because that's the most lucrative point source. But it only does that. It makes the most sense to do that after you've gotten some stuff, after people have crafted things, after you've collected some stuff. So it puts this arc in play. But I think at its core, the Vagabond helps illustrate that Root is a game designed around this core idea of how do I want people to relate to this faction, to the player playing this faction, and how do I want other players to relate to them. And I think that the Vagabond embodies that in a really specific way. And I get why people don't like the Vagabond. We don't need to go too deep on this. I think it's awesome. I love playing the Vagabond.
We will talk about it when we get
Yeah.
to the Vagabond. We need to have that talk. I
Han
think.
Solo, the character. Like, yeah.
Now you wanted to, maybe we should get into this before we talk about like general decisions of the game. You want to talk about the deck of cards, which is this magical multi-use tool in the game.
Yeah.
I think it's incredible how many things they've done with a simple deck of cards.
With 3 suits. Yeah.
4
4
suits.
suits. But yeah.
Yeah. The
3 in a
wild suit.
wild. Yeah.
Correct. And so these cards, every faction gets to draw in the base game. Every faction gets to draw at least one card at the end of their turn. And based on other actions you've taken, you essentially unlock more card draw. And these cards are used for all kinds of things. We talked about crafting items for victory points. You can craft them for ongoing abilities. And the other thing is that there is one of each suit in the game, something called a dominance card. And a dominance card is something that I wish was more viable as a strategy in Root. But basically, if you have the Fox dominance card and you have at least 10 victory points in the game, you can play that card in front of you and say, I don't care about victory points anymore. But if at the start of my turn, I am ruling 3 Fox clearings, then I just win the game.
Yeah.
And the Vagabonds actually can form coalitions with players using the
have you ever seen this
dominance.
happen?
I've never seen a Vagabond coalition victory. And that's and I have seen dominance victories, but they are rare. And it's mostly because you're telegraphing to the whole table, hey, come and get me because I'm going to win on my turn. And there are so many ways for a whole table of players to take a clearing rule away from you.
Yeah.
However, the game has possibilities because, of course, every time you battle, there is a chance you're going to roll a 00. The battle dice is actually, it's a D12 that's actually a D4. The 4 numbers on it are 0, 1, 2, and 3. And the dice are incredible and sometimes so evil in Root because they giveth and they taketh away, right? Like they are swingy, these dice, and they're unpredictable, these dice.
Root doesn't have a ton of randomness. So one of the things is these cards that we're sort of talking about to wrap this conversation, but the dice is a really important point of uncertainty in Root, where if you didn't have the dice to give you uncertainty about how certain actions would go, I think the table would seize up. The dice give you permission to not fully think through things, the consequences of if I do this, maybe they'll do that, then they'll do that, and plan, right? Because at the end of the day, Pete, we can make a deal that we're going to team up and we're going to attack Paul, who's playing the birds. So we make that agreement. but we'll see how it goes, right? We could both make a deal to fight Paul, and we both roll double zeros, as you said, and then the game sort of takes on a new shape. And I think that's really important, that you can't sit there and plan the rest of the game out to a T with a
Yeah,
player
there's
if you're the two
very
strongest players.
correct. There's very little hidden information in the
Yeah,
game. The cards in people's hands and the results of those dice,
yeah,
right? That's kind of it for uncertainty. And some of the cards, by the way, are ambush cards, which if you get attacked, you can play an ambush card and deal 2 hits before the battle even starts. And I will tell you this, every time you really need to win a battle, your opponent is holding an ambush card, just so you know. Like just be, and what that means is that like starting a battle with less than 4 attackers feels risky,
hmm
even when the odds are totally stacked against your opponent.
yeah. Which gives the game this mechanical shape, like I'm saying, right, Pete? Because the game has to build up, right? The game wants players to build up to these to have sort of safe conflicts where you can go in, but then you get ambushed, whatever. But because the game's built out up, someone's drawn an ambush and it has this drama built in. But part of the cards are so I think the cards are really important. Sorry, I keep distracting. You say something, then I get excited about what you say, and then I want to talk about that. But the cards are sort of the shared currency of the game because the cards relate to the clearings. The cards are what most factions do something interesting with cards, whether it's everyone can craft them, everyone can build something on top of using those cards. But also, the cards in some ways almost function as the engine behind Root. Root is a game about starting it's not always starting small, but Root's a game about you've been given a plan and you have to execute that plan. And there's usually some form of a snowball element to that plan, but not always. There's sort of different curves. If you plotted the number of points that every faction scores on a turn of a game of Root, every faction is going to look a little bit different. The Eyrie
Mhm.
Dynasty are going to be a little bit linear, curving up, right? They're going to score about the same number of points every turn. And as they get more roofs, their buildings onto the board, they're going to score more at the end of every turn. That can go down to your point, Pete, that this is a dynamic decision space. Everyone might decide that the Erie's out of control, force them to turmoil, and then destroy their roost. And then they're not going to score a lot of points at the end of that turn. But roughly, that's sort of the direction. The Woodland Alliance, they're going to score basically no points for a while, and then a few, and then, like I said, maybe a ton. And I think that the cards are a key part of giving different factions the sort of ability to have these explosive turns, or with the Eyrie Dynasty, the ability to keep their ball rolling, right? You need these cards to program your actions because you use the cards to say what clearing you're going to do an action in. Or for the cats, you just need the cards because your abilities are really weird and you really just want wild cards in your hand so you can get extra turn actions. And you just want to be able to draw cards so you can do that
Yeah,
as a
cards
base thing.
are cards are more important to some factions than others.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
and I would say in the base game, the cards are probably most important for the Woodland Alliance. Because the Woodland Alliance uses the cards to spread their sympathy. Um, and they're obviously important to every faction, but I think the Woodland Alliance more like needs specific suits of cards
Yeah.
in order to advance whatever board position they happen to be in. Whereas everyone else can kind of use what they get. The Woodland Alliance can have really big turns if they get the right cards.
Totally. But you can also have a really bad turn as the Eyrie where you just draw poorly. You're doing really
Mhm.
well and you just don't draw what you need to program the actions that you need to take. And you feel like you've left yourself open. You haven't overcommitted. You've been playing a fairly safe game. And then all of a sudden you're not drawing right. And I think that the fact that there's randomness in the cards too is really important because if Root was just a stage play where everyone's not only their identity at the table was set, but their agency was too, if in every single game the Eyrie player was actually the strongest at the table, no matter what, that's not interesting. Root is good. Root is interesting because in some games, the Eyrie player rolls double zeros, rolls zeros repeatedly, gets hosed on cards, and all of a sudden the table dynamics are way different. The Woodland Alliance has exploded. The cats are having a hard time because the Vagabond's stabbing them, and now all of a sudden the cats are figuring out how they can make deals with the Eyrie Dynasty to try to stay in the game and shut down this amazing Woodland Alliance that's somehow taken root, right? And the cards make that possible. Without the cards, the game's going to have a pretty similar arc. So just basic card draw gives this game a lot of life.
I think the stuff you just said leads me into something I want to get into before we talk about the individual factions, which are
Okay.
the basic decisions of Root. And I think that Root is a very political game because it is a game where the main question every moment is who is winning and who should stop them from winning? Because the answer is always not me to both of those questions, right? Like, so, because if I'm doing the table talk right, then I am convincing the table that they all need to deal with whoever I think is my biggest competition. Because this is where I think Root turns some gamers off because
Mm,
it is a game where the balance of the game relies on the table understanding how strong every player's position is at any given moment
yeah.
and to know what the possibilities every player at the table has. People who play Root a lot talk a lot about policing as a consideration in Root. That policing essentially means who is going to give up some of their action economy just to stop somebody from winning. Because maybe you'll get some points for doing that, but you probably have other things you'd rather do with your actions.
If I'm the
And
cats, I want to build. I
you
don't want to
always
fight
want to
people.
build.
I want to build,
It's funny because the cats look like they're the police,
but they're
but they
not.
actually have some of the worst action economy in the game.
Yeah.
And so I think that that is the core decision space of Root that every player shares, no matter which factions you have, is who looks like they're running away with it and who has the best capacity to stop that. And so this is a game where maybe you can make some alliances, but the alliances you make are sort of situational deals based on a particular board state. Because they're, the shared incentive everyone has is that you don't want everyone else to win.
Yeah.
And so if you and I are playing with two other people and one person looks like they're about to win, our shared incentive is literally just to stop that person from winning.
Completely. And I think that, okay, Pete, have you played Cosmic Encounter?
I have.
Okay, so in Cosmic Encounter, it's also an asymmetric high conflict game. You can share victories with other players. If you both make a final attack in that game, and there, I mentioned Cosmic because it's clear that if there is no Cosmic, it's really hard for me to understand how the world ever gets to Root. Cosmic is a really important design game in the design sort of ludography of asymmetric games in general. But that's an episode for a different day. But
Yeah.
I say this because Cosmic allows you to share victory with other players. And Root, Pete, you talked about coalition victories with the Vagabond. Bullshit. It's just no, it doesn't happen. But it's good. It's because the game needs set dressing and it needs these things to give people hope and all these different. And I like that. It's really cool part of the design. It's important, but it doesn't mechanically. It's not real. Root is cynical from the perspective of because you cannot share victories, no alliance will ever last. That's what everyone should understand is you will never make an alliance in Root that will last because the mechanics say that they cannot. There will be an ultimate victor. So you only have alliances of shared opportunity, and really what the alliance is Pete. Look, I'm losing, you're winning. If you don't do this, you're going to lose too. You have to do this because you're in second. So you have to go do this thing. Or look, you're winning. And if you don't do this, you're gonna lose to the vagabond. So I'm sorry, but you just have to do this, right? So it's pointing out pieces of the game state that don't work, but it's not a real alliance usually. Am I right? Like we might work
No,
together for a
yeah, for
couple
sure.
turns.
And what's funny about this game is that it actually is because you do need to be aggressive with other players in order to win with pretty much every faction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in the late game, it can actually make a lot of sense to pick on the weakest player if it's your easiest path to getting your last couple of points. But if early in the game, you're choosing to mostly be aggressive with the person who's in the weakest position, you actually are creating a bit of a power vacuum for someone else to swoop in. And so this is why the politics of the table are very important. You don't make true alliances. That is true. However, every player has the potential to point out to somebody else, hey, actually, I think it actually would make sense for you to spend your move and attack action over there.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of the table talk of Root is essentially being a salesman to other players that you have a plan for them. Not because it's good for you, but because it's good for them.
Yeah, totally. And I think that root is cool, Pete, because I've played games where you are incentivized to betray one another, right? To just say you're going to do something and then not do it. And I don't think my experience of playing root, and other people have probably had a different experience, and that's okay because root's a complex game that's high player agency, that's very group dependent, and everyone's going to have a different experience, and that's part of games like these. But in my plays of this game, Pete, I felt that I want to be pretty fair with everyone at the table. And that's partially because this is a 4-player game. You can play it with less players, but this is a 4-player game. So if I upset the table, if I do something that isn't fair, everyone hates a bully. Everyone hates a bully. And people really hate a lying bully. At least I hope we do. And when we hate a lying bully, what you do is you attack them and you take them down a peg. So if I tell you I'm going to do something and I'm like, haha, I'm not doing it and I'm going to kick you in the teeth instead, everyone at the table sees that. And it's pretty easy for people to then just target you and control you. If you have 2 people fighting you en route, you can't fend them off reliably, right? The dynamics are such that if people decide they're gonna really focus on you, unless you've spiraled to a point where the game's kind of won, if you built your position up. But if it's early to mid game, people can really hem you in and control what you're doing. So you need to keep people at least thinking that you're being fair at the table.
Well, and this is a game where revenge is very real.
Yeah.
Because it can become clear to someone at a certain point that they're not going to win.
Mhm.
And at that point, you have to figure out what is winning for me right now, because I
Mhm.
know that I'm not going to get to 30 points. And this is where king making becomes a very real thing in Root, because I can be like, well, this guy screwed me over.
Yeah.
And so my game now is just to kneecap them.
Yeah.
And that actually can totally happen. And I also think, though, when it comes to deal making in Root, if you make a deal with someone where you say, "Hey, I'm gonna take all my warriors out of this clearing where I have 2 buildings. Do you promise you won't attack me?" And they say yes, you're actually being naive. Like, I think that you have to understand
Never leave your
what the
buildings
incentives of the
undefended.
game. You have to understand what the incentives of the game are.
Yeah.
And when we talked about mid game and late game, we
Mhm.
should maybe talk about the length of a game of Root,
Yeah.
because you'll probably take maybe like 7 to 8 turns in a
Yeah.
game of Root. Um, and that's not very much.
Yeah.
Um, and it means that if you have one really bad turn, that you're probably still, it's not like going to totally ruin your game, probably. But if you have 2 really bad turns,
You're
you're playing
probably
from
done.
behind at that point.
Yeah. The Woodland Alliance, I think, is really key with this. You have to have a base by turn 2. If you don't have a base by turn 3, you must have a base by turn wait. If you don't have a base by turn 2, you must have a base by turn 3, and if you don't, you've lost. I think. Unless some wild thing happens at the table, which can happen in Root, but there's this sort of there are sort of specific things that different factions need to accomplish by different points of the game, and if they don't happen, it is sort of calamitous. And that does feel really bad. So I get why people bounce off Root, but at the same time, it's also really exciting when everyone's playing a good game of Root always builds to a climax, right? Because the game is sort of set up to snowball in that way, and because people are incentivized to build up mechanically, it all, in my experience, if you have roughly equally skilled players that are doing a good job of talking about the game together, it almost ends with a really exciting moment where you're not quite sure who's going to win. And in some ways, it might come down to the dice or the cards drawn, but it's always really exciting. Pete, I have a question about deal making that I want to
Okay.
ask you. Woodland Alliance.
Uh-huh.
Have you ever seen a Woodland Alliance player? I was like begging y'all to do this with me in the game we played. Say the cats, hey cats, I really need to revolt in this clearing, but I don't have this card. Can you walk into that sympathy and give me a card of that
Absolutely
suit?
not. No,
No?
absolutely not.
Would you
No.
do it?
No, absolutely
What if I
not.
blow
Because
up a roost?
listen, the Woodland Alliance is a faction that once they get online, they're almost unstoppable.
Oh, come on.
And
Use me as
so we'll
your
we'll get to that when we talk about the Woodland Alliance section. But the answer is absolutely never.
I'll be your
Um,
terrorist.
However, I really think that the one common decision space question for every faction in Root
Yep.
is, what do I need to do this turn
Mhm.
to set myself up for my next turn?
Yeah.
Because that's really the key to being, I think, a good Root player, because the order in which you take your actions make it so
Yeah.
that a lot of times what you need to have, like a good daylight or a good bird song, I mean, has to happen in your daylight or your evening. And so that's, and then the game has such a dynamic shifting board state that what you have to be doing is either be sneaky about what you want to do on your next turn, or build yourself up such a defensive position that people will have a hard time stopping you from having the big turn you're going to have next.
Totally. And I think that the idea that Root, I think this is a really important point that you just made, Pete. Root is a game about planning. It's a game about plans and those plans falling apart, those plans being clear to one another at the table. It's really important that all the players, to some extent, understand where other factions' points can come from. That's your ability to understand the other player's decision space, and then your ability to help the table have some sort of plan to combat them. If you don't have a plan for the Woodland Alliance of how you're going to get it base on the board, you're going to have a terrible time. I think there's certain factions that are more flexible than others, especially depending on
Big
how
time.
you've played them. But almost every faction has to have a plan and has some potential for a plan. Even the Vagabond, right? How you use your different items, the sequencing of them, what clearings you're going to go to, where you need to be on the board in the late game, and what that means for where you're going to slip. All of this game is about planning. This is not a tactical game in any way, shape, or form. And if someone wants a tactical decision space, go elsewhere. This is not it. This is deep strategic planning game, right? You have to make tactical decisions at times when everything goes wrong, falls apart, but it's a game about making plans and trying to effectuate those plans and how those plans fall apart when they intersect with other people's plans.
So let's before we like make a 3-hour podcast, let's get into the strategic decision space of each faction, I
I'm
think.
just trying to negotiate with you about factions in a game, an imaginary game of the Woodland Alliance. But
That's
okay,
so funny.
let's
We'll
do
get
it.
there. Let's
Okay.
go in the order that we introduced them. So the Marquita Cat, the industrialists.
Yep.
What's so funny about the Marquita Cat is it's so easy to paint them as the bad guys,
Yeah.
because they start off everywhere on the board and they're cutting down trees.
Yeah.
But as you said in your sort of brief intro to this faction, the main decision space of the Marquita Cat is that their main engine for gaining points is by building. And for them, in order to build, they need wood, which is a token in the game. And that wood has to come from sawmills, which is one of their buildings. And in order to build somewhere, you must be able to essentially draw a line from where the wood is to where you want to build, going through only clearings that you rule.
Yep.
And so what you're trying to do
Meaning
as the
you have
Marquis,
more pieces than anyone else.
more
More
warriors and
warriors.
buildings, right?
Yes.
And buildings count as well. And so their whole thing is sort of essentially protecting a supply chain. And their types of buildings are sawmills, which make wood. They are arguably the most important building that the Woodland Alliance can produce.
Hmm.
I would say second most important building are their recruiters, which puts their warriors on the board. And then the least important one for them is the uh,
Workshop.
workshops, which allow them to craft. Because
The
actually, I
girdle
don't think they're
shop.
very good. I don't think they're very good crafters.
No, they're terrible.
Yeah, for sure.
Don't
And
waste your
so
time. Build sawmills.
the decision space of Marquita Cat is so funny because you start the game in the most powerful position you will have for the entire game of Root. That the decision space of the Marquita Cat is, how do I fall back from my starting position to form a defensive line where I can have a back line where I'm building things.
Yeah.
And their whole game is, you need to build something every turn.
And you probably are a little bit slower than the fastest faction
You're not
Left.
gonna race anybody. You want a long game.
Yeah,
You want the game to
left.
go long.
Exactly. If the Erie dynasty is left alone, you will lose. So how can you make the game go long? And another thing that incentivizes this is a lot of every faction. I mean, the whole game is special powers, but you have the special power, the field hospital, such that whenever your warriors are destroyed in battle, if you can expend a card matching the suit in which they were lost, you get to just take those and put them back on this sort of home base of yours called the keep, which is another special token that you get to add to the board. So it acts as your home base. It can be destroyed by other players. The cats are the only faction in the game that can be eliminated from the game if all of your pieces are removed and the keep is removed, which is wild. And sorry, I interrupted your really good overview.
No,
I just
you're
want to talk
great.
about field
You're doing
hospitals,
great.
and also the cats are about this tension too. You said, Pete, we all want to. You want to pull back to try to create a sort of area of safety where you can just run this little industrial sawmill engine, which is absolutely true. And you also are resilient because you can replace your warriors by using these field hospitals to keep them coming back. But you must push outwards eventually because
Correct.
every clearing can only hold so many buildings. So because of that, you're going to have to force your way out. And maybe you want to force your way out early so you can save some of those building locations close to home for the late game when the points really count. But if you do that, maybe you're relieving yourself to exposed early. Maybe you're giving up a little bit of control, and you're taking the risk that you won't be able to get your engine on sort of going. Also, we talked about relationships, and we're really talking about the base game. The vagabond that's walking around is really important for the cats because you're probably going to be early allies because the vagabond, you don't want to hit them as the cats because you want the vagabond to be giving you cards and opening up ruins because later on you can build in those spaces. So whatever you can do to keep the vagabond happy and open up building locations for you, that's an alliance that makes sense early, but you want a long game. So you have to figure out how to make that make sense. And late game, no matter what you do, the vagabond is gonna come try to stab you. They just are.
Brendan,
You have juicy wood on the table and they want it. They want points. They get points for hitting you when they are hostile with you. They're gonna hit you. So solve that problem too. And they'll be behind enemy lines. You think you can expand and be safe? No, you can't. They're coming for you.
Brendan, you have no idea how delighted I am to hear you talking about Root at this deep of a level. Like, this is just like part of my goal when I became a host of this podcast was to get this episode to happen. And
Yeah.
I just got to take a break and say, I'm having a ball right now.
Same. I'm in my root t-shirt, my roots,
Yeah.
my marquise to cat
Yeah.
stuffy. Yeah, it's good.
So the cats are so funny because, like you said, in the late game, their biggest problem is if you get to the late game and you're competitive, then you're
Yeah.
out of places to build,
And you're a
right?
pinata.
Yeah, for sure. And that wood that you need so much for your buildings, everyone else gets a point for blowing it up
Yeah,
because
you're a
it's a
pinata.
token and tokens are worth points.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's so funny. They are considered to be one of the hardest factions to win with.
Yeah.
Um and I think it's just mostly because their action economy is really bad.
Yeah.
Um and I think that the other reason people have a hard time winning with Marquis de Cat is because you feel like you're supposed to be the police because you
Right.
have the most pieces.
And because
And
probably everyone at the table is shouting at you that you should be
correct.
fighting.
But you really cannot afford to use your actions just to stop someone else from winning.
And let's illustrate why this is the case. So as the cats, you have more or less 3 actions. You have this really cool move action where you get sort of 2 actions in
A
one.
double move,
A
right?
double move. That's a really good feature of the cats that makes them nimble, but really you get to do 3 things on your turn. And the Erie dynasty, by contrast, if they've really built up, could do what's a fair number, Pete? 8 things?
Easily. Easily.
Easily. 10 things to affect
Maybe.
the board?
Maybe.
Yeah. So, and the Woodland Alliance, if they've built up, could be doing like 7, 5, 6, 7 things. You're just slow, and you will be slow forever. There's nothing you can do. There are cards. I'm sure there's ways you can build the cats to be somewhat
Yeah.
stronger with the crafting and little things, but that's tactical, opportunistic play.
Yeah.
That ultimately, end of the day, you're this like slow moving. You just want to you want to sawmills. Just put the sawmills down.
And what I think is funny, Brendan, is that you enjoy playing as the cats.
I think that the cats are fun because for a lot of reasons. One is they're They have a lot of personality. Kyle Farron's art is incredible. They're sort of in one of this sort of, at least with Root Digital, they're the mascot for the game, and
Mhm.
they're just cranky, just really
Yeah.
cranky. So that's cute. I think that the gameplay loop, the sort of positive feedback loop of building sawmills so you can build more sawmills is fun. Building recruiters and gushing cats onto the board because you have 25 pieces that you can get out there
Yeah.
is fun. And that's mostly why they're fun. They're simple. They're the Ryu of
They
Root.
are when the Root base game came out, they were always the faction you gave a new player
Yeah, for sure.
because their actions make sense and their point opportunities make sense.
Yeah.
Um, I think we should move on to the Eyrie
Okay.
Dynasty.
Yep.
So the Eyrie Dynasty, as we mentioned before, have a sort of action programming situation, and they have 4 different leaders, and each leader has a unique ability and is also going to give you 2 starting bird cards in your decree. And as we said before, the 4 actions in your decree are to recruit, where you must recruit a piece from a roost in a clearing that matches the suit of the card.
That always comes first.
Right.
Always
And then
first.
you must move from clearings that match the suit of the card.
Always second.
Then you must battle in
Yep.
clearings that match the suit of the card. And lastly, you must build a roost in a clearing matching the suit of the card. When those cards are bird cards, it gives you a ton of flexibility because you can recruit, battle, move, whatever in any clearing, and it will satisfy your decree. What the game does to dissuade you from just jamming bird cards in your decree is that if you go into turmoil, you lose 1 point for every bird card that you put in your decree. And so it makes the painful part of playing the Eyrie even more painful.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
yeah, go on.
no, keep going.
And so their decision space is basically all about maintaining a decree that is growing, but also manageable.
Yeah.
And a common way that people build out their Eyrie decrees is by throwing a lot of suited cards in the move action. And you'll see Eyrie players sometimes just running birds back and forth between 2 clearings just to satisfy their decree.
Hmm.
Um, and the other, I think the trickiest part of their decree is that you need to put cards in build. You need to be building your roosts. However, guaranteeing that you will always be ruling a clearing to build a roost at the end of your turn where you don't already have a roost is the most difficult part of their decree, but also the most important part of their decree because having roosts at the end of your turn is how you get points.
Yep. So the cool thing we talked about how I think in some ways the Erie Dynasty is about or that Root is about identities and relationships. The leaders that you get really, because of you talked about, Pete. I want to underscore this. The leader that you pick informs what powers, what of those effects, what of those abilities, move, recruit, fight, build, you have wilds in, what cards you start wild. So the charismatic builder, the charismatic leader lets you recruit 2 birds, 2 meeples, 2 warriors to the board every time you recruit. That's really good, but there's other ones too. The warrior just gets an extra hit whenever you fight, so that's amazing. The
The despot
despot,
lets you build anywhere.
and you get points for attacking things.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of both things. And then the builder is cool because then it's sort of this fallback woodpecker leader that says, "Hey, well, you're not really that good at crafting, but maybe you found yourself in a position where you could actually be good at crafting and find a way to make that work." And I think that's really cool. Pete, I want to throw something off you. In
Okay.
my mind, the Erie Dynasty, I'm getting are aristocratic warhawks, and they're also a bureaucracy simulator that highlights the fragility of societies with frequent regime change. Right? That's a
Big time.
lot. That's a big
Yeah.
idea, but
No, for sure.
also you kind of can't win at root. So if you're playing the Erie Dynasty, the question is like, am I gonna turmoil once or no times? I think is kind of what you're going for. And if you're going to
Yeah.
turmoil one time, you want it to be on your terms, not the table's terms, right? Because all of your program is public. So it's more a question of when do I want to ditch the leader I have? And what leader do I want to go into? How am I going to, we talked about planning. How am I going to set myself up for a turmoil that helps me? Because turmoiling, I think from every other seat at the table feels terrible for the Eyrie dynasty, right? It just looks horrible. You lose all your actions. And you can make a big hem and haw about how horrible it is. You lost your leader. The whole world's falling apart. And it can be bad, but your roosts don't go away. So the things that are actually scoring you points, getting you closer to winning the game, stay on the board. So if you can find a way out of it, it's not actually terrible. And I don't want to turmoil on recruit. I want to take like most of my turn. I want to not be able to build. So I
Yeah.
can like at least recruit. I can at least move. I can at least fight. And if I turmoil on build, I got 3/4 of a turn, didn't lose any of my roosts, and just get to kind of reset what I'm doing with a new leader.
So you've seen me have some planned turmoils to a high effect in games of Root.
And I don't think I
one of
even
my
knew it
right.
necessarily. Yeah.
One of my favorite ways to play the Eyrie is to start with the one that spits out 2 warriors every time you recruit,
Yeah.
and
Charismatic,
essentially
right?
get all of your warriors on the board.
Mm-hmm.
Turmoil because you can't recruit anymore because every
Yeah.
bird is in the game. And then at that point, you can just play from a defensive fighting position because you have every bird on the board. Now, we also played a game where you didn't realize that I had no warriors left to recruit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you attacked me and essentially saved my decree, which is why to play against the Eyrie dynasty is to intimately understand every card in
Yep.
their decree. And the other big thing for them on building is that they are the only faction that if there's a tie in a clearing for rule, they will rule it, because usually if there's a tie, nobody rules it. But this helps them with that build action, which is so difficult for them.
Yeah. I feel like when you play the Eyrie, you're kind of making a choice of more than any of the other factions that I've played so far, making a choice of who do I want to be when I start, because those leaders, they really do inform the type of Eyrie dynasty you're going to play. And there's simple differences, right? Instead of 1 recruit, you get 2. When you fight, you get 1 more hit. We said them all once already,
Yeah.
but they really give shape to everything you play. And I think it does that because of the fact that root is so short, right? If this is a 20 turn game, the impact of adding 1 extra piece of the board every time you recruit is much reduced. So I think because of that, the identities, the shortness of the game accentuates the identities in a way that is cool and means that you can have these different openings that give you real strategic intrigue here, like starting charismatic and gushing to the board, and then forcing a turmoil, and then finishing with like the despot or the commander, whatever.
So before we we need to move on, but
Okay.
2 things to think about with the Eyrie dynasty. One of them is that if you can get in a weird situation with the Eyrie dynasty where you get board wiped, but they actually get a pretty decent reset whenever
Mm,
you get board wiped, where that you get to just plop a roost basically anywhere on the map and recruit out from there, which is kind of neat. But
yeah.
I should also say that Root is a game that if you play on the basic forest map, the clearings are evenly distributed among the suits. But you can optionally play Root to where the suits of all the clearings on the map are random. And that can be really nice for the Eyrie dynasty if there's a clump of clearings of the same suit adjacent to each other to put a suited card in build. Because normally putting a suited
Mm,
card in build is really dangerous
yep.
because you have to move far across the map to get to those last couple. But if like there's 3 rabbit clearings right next to each other, you can throw a build on rabbit and be like, I am going to war on these 3 clearings.
Totally. And I've tried this, and you can do that, and I'm sure you can make it work. But for me, then when you do that, the second you put the rabbit down and build, everyone goes, "Oh, we can just pile on the next rabbit in front of the Eyrie and create a big mess," which is actually a really cool mechanism that works sort of to create moments where there's lots of people all in the same clearing, which is interesting politically. So it's a mechanism because one faction has a public plan that everyone at the table then can create a game shape that brings everyone together for things like that. That's good design. That's really
I mean,
cool.
also, I said we need to stop, but
Yeah.
as the Eyrie, you can put 1 or 2 cards in your decree. So
Mhm.
that
Oh, yeah.
basically
I
you
love
get to
that.
choose how risky you wanna play,
Yeah.
basically. And the other thing is that I think they're probably, in the base game, the best police faction
Mhm.
because they have to battle anyway,
Yeah.
right? However, they don't have a lot of flexibility in policing because they can only battle in certain clearings. And sometimes they will attack the person who is losing just because they have to start a battle.
Yeah.
One thing you can do to turmoil the Eyrie is essentially just get out of their way so they
Run
have no
away.
one to fight.
Yeah.
And then they'll just turmoil because they can't battle, which is so
And
funny.
I do think that this is why the cats and the Eyrie sort of start at odds with each other in some ways because the cats start with a piece everywhere on the board. And part of the reason for that mechanically, beyond the fact that it's this cool sort of set piece and way to start the game, that I do think matters to the player's experience at the table. That's a really interesting psychological difference. But is that it functionally makes it such that the Eyrie have an outlet for fights a little bit more early
Yeah,
on. There's just little cats to pick off here and there.
correct.
And that puts them at odds in some way because when you're the cat player, I might not care about the cat across the board, um, but I just don't fight me. Just leave me alone, right? There's something about being a player in a system that's being targeted that feels bad. So even if it's incidental, and I know that psychologically, it still has a psychological effect where a little bit I'm like, oh, these Erie players are out to get me.
All right, so I'm going to start a revolt and
Okay.
force us to move on to the Woodland Alliance. Uh, I think the Woodland Alliance is probably the thematically strongest faction in the base game because they so clearly represent something real, which is political revolutions, guerrilla warfare. This is Che Guevara, right? Like
Yeah.
this is a grassroots movement. And go on.
Well, and
So,
the if you're the other players at the table, the best way to deal with the Woodland Alliance is to not legitimize them. Just leave them alone. Put up martial law. So put up three warriors all around them, which is really hurts the Woodland Alliance because then they can't move anywhere really. And then don't attack their sympathy. Don't touch their sympathy. Just do nothing, and they won't be able to do anything because they won't be able to spread more sympathy. Don't give them a reason
and
for
what's
people
so
to feel
funny though
sympathetic.
is that in the early game you have to smash their sympathy
Why?
because thematically it's so funny because the Woodland Alliance spreads sympathy for their cause.
Yeah,
And every time someone walks into a clearing with sympathy, you're strengthening the alliance because you're treading on them, right? You
yeah.
are stomping upon the sympathy, and that only makes it easier for them to spread more sympathy.
They gain a new supporter.
Correct. And if they have a clearing at the start of their turn that is already sympathetic, and they have enough supporters of the suit of that clearing, they can have what's called a revolt in that clearing, which literally kills every other piece in the clearing and lets you put a building and your first warrior of the game onto the board. And until you get that base established, your game is very boring as the Woodland Alliance because all you're doing is putting out a little token and hoping that people walk on it but don't kill
Yeah.
it.
Yeah,
Because you actually
and
grab a card out of their hand if it matches the suit of the clearing. And if they don't have a card that matches the suit of the clearing in their hand, then you just top deck one.
yep,
But that's terrible for some factions to get a card stolen from them because some factions are so reliant on cards. So they become an annoyance, especially if you're building sympathy in the choke points of a map to where people have to walk all over your sympathy just to move.
yeah.
That's huge for them.
And to the point you were making too, Pete, about the early game can be a little bit slow and boring. You literally just don't take actions in part of we talked about how every faction has 3 phases, birdsong, daylight, and evening or whatever. You just don't take any evening actions until you have a base. You have to have a base, and it unlocks this whole range of things that you can do. It's a key part of your game that you just don't get to do until then. But also, I wanna be more crude than what the verb is revolt, but what you really do is you set up sympathy, and then you just bomb the shit out of the clearing,
Yeah,
right?
it's
You
it's
destroy
it's
everything there.
it's it's like, because like thematically, if we think about what we're doing, right? Like this could be like terrorism, right?
Oh,
That's what you're
100%.
doing.
My rebels are your terrorists for sure.
Correct. Freedom
That
fighters,
is yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and so getting that base on the board all of a sudden turns you into a different type of threat in the game.
Mhm.
Um, but in the early game, all you're doing is taking all of your cards and sticking them in your supporters pile because you have to get that base.
And you're limited to 5, which I yeah. So you can't ever have more than 5 supporters until you get a base. I think there's good game design reasons for why that exists that are too nuanced to even go into in this part of the episode, but basically, you're a looming threat that everyone is terrified of, and they know they shouldn't hit you if you have a sympathy token in their clearing because they're only gonna make you stronger, but they have to.
well,
But
and
they don't. But psychologically, you just have to. Just hit the
let's
token.
get to why what every other faction wants is for there to be no bases on the board, and that's because the biggest superpower of the Woodland Alliance
Mhm.
is that as the defender in a battle,
Oh,
you get the high number.
yeah, it's incredible.
And it is incredible in Root how many times one of those dice is a 0. Like it feels like more than half the time. Like
This is
it's wild. And
this
so
is
go on.
No, you go, I'm sorry. I
And so
interrupted.
once they have warriors on the board, they can start protecting their sympathy with warriors because normally if you attack and there is no defender,
Yeah.
no warrior defending, even if you roll a 0, you get a free hit. You
Mhm.
always get a free hit if there's no warriors defending. But once they put at least one guy in a clearing, if you roll a 0, you're not touching that guy and he's smacking you.
And it's really hard to without experiencing this system of 0 to 3 dice roll, and then the defender actually gets the higher hit. The way that you experience that, the easiest way to explain that is like, imagine you were going to a sword fight, but all of a sudden, if the Woodland Alliance is the defender, you have a Nerf sword. And
Yeah.
it never works, you know? They're very hard to fight once they're established. But then the other cool thing about once they have one base, we talked about they can only ever have 3 bases, and they can only ever have one base in each of the 3 types of clearings: mouse, rabbit, or fox. So anytime they revolt and build a base, you know all of a sudden as everyone else at the table what clearings are safe, where they can't set up a new base again. And I think that dynamic is interesting, good, gives players something low-hanging fruit to talk about, something to feel smart about if you're one of the other players at the table. It gives the Woodland Alliance gives the game a really important arc and flow. They also, because they're the comeback faction, they're trying to they just start with nothing. They're trying to get a base on the board desperately, but they can really get going. Every time they build a base, they're getting more cards. They're pretty good at crafting because they craft with their sympathy tokens, which they can spread. And their sympathy just kind of starts gushing points on the board towards the end of the game. They're like in some ways they're a reason why if there's a clear first and second, there's still something else to talk about sometimes, right? If the Woodland Alliance is sort of behind and they're at 18 points, that could be scary if they're in the right position.
I think that the Woodland Alliance is arguably the strongest faction in the base game because once they do get online, it is very hard to reverse their trajectory
Sure.
because it's very difficult to kill their bases if if they defend with like 2 warriors at a base.
Yeah.
It is you have to roll a double 3 in order to take it out with one attack, which you could play multiple games of Root without ever seeing a double 3.
Yeah. The
Um,
odds are really low on that. Yeah.
exactly, and so I think that a good Woodland Alliance player is going to use that first base as the spring point for everything else they do. Um, because in the late game, they get a lot of points for spreading sympathy, but it's really hard to spread sympathy with supporters in the late game because it starts to cost you more and more cards to do it. But if you can send one guy to a clearing and just dump him off and then organize with him, all of a sudden that becomes sympathy, and that sympathy might be worth 4 points in the
Yeah.
late game. And so they just become really hard to stop once they get going because your instinct is to kill their sympathy. but that just gives them an easier time to put that sympathy back out there. And so there's just no easy way to undo their progress if you let them get a foothold.
Yeah. And the one of the reasons why what you just said too, it becomes harder and harder for them to spread supporters is it's really tough for as the board builds up, right? As the cats get up to 25 warriors on the board or close to that, as the Eyrie Dynasty player gets all their pieces on the board, I think they go up to like 20 or something. They can have a lot of pieces on the board. It just gums up because it's really hard. We haven't really talked, Pete, about how movement works en route. But unless you control a clearing, you can't move from
You
it.
rule where you're moving from or the
Or
destination you are going
you're
to.
moving to. Thank you. So the Woodland Alliance, because they only have 10 pieces and probably fewer because they've turned some of those pieces into officers, it's just you don't rule a lot of clearings. So you can't move as much when the board seizes up. So you have this window to really sort of
That's how
get a
you stop
foothold.
them, is by ruling all of their clearings,
Yeah.
but
And
not
all around them.
hitting them.
Yeah.
But not
Yeah.
hitting them. Like, just
No.
sit on them.
Yep.
And what's so funny is I actually think that the faction that has the best answer to the Woodland Alliance is actually the Vagabond.
Why?
So let's talk about the Vagabond. You see how I snuck in
I
getting us
love it.
into our last faction?
Yeah.
Um,
It's
so the
good.
Vagabond, as we kind of mentioned before, they are playing the most different game compared to everyone else because they only have one meeple on the board, and um, every one of the items that exists in the game that can be crafted represents a different action for the Woodland Alliance. Sorry, for the Vagabond. And one of those items that's really important for the Vagabond as a check on the Woodland Alliance is a crossbow.
Mm.
The crossbow for the Vagabond just removes a piece. It does not actually battle, it just removes a piece. And so if you can pick off one of the Woodland Alliance warriors that they were using as their one defender, haha, we're so clever, it's so hard to hit us, we're just going to defend with one warrior. But if you pick that warrior off with a crossbow, all of a sudden you've got an opening that
Yeah.
you've created. Um, so let's talk about the Vagabond. The base game comes with 3 different characters you can be as the Vagabond, which is the Tinkerer, the Thief, and the Ranger. But there's a lot more. The Riverfolk expansion adds more. There's also the possibility, if you have the Riverfolk expansion, to have 2 Vagabonds in your game, which is pretty wild. And then I think almost every future expansion has added more Vagabonds, or they made a Vagabond pack for one of the Kickstarters. So there's a lot of different ways you can play as the Vagabond. But what the different Vagabonds do is they give you different starting items. And then every Vagabond has a special ability that they can use their torch for. The main action of the torch is to explore a ruin to find more items, but there's only 4 ruins on the board. So your torch becomes useless for that action at that point. And so the other ones have different effects that they can use their torch for. And
Crazy things. Really
some of them
good
are
things.
really wild.
Like the Harrier
Uh,
just teleports anywhere on the board.
and the
The
Harrier's not in the
Tinker
base game.
no. Oh, yeah, so we can't talk about it today. The Tinker just gets to tutor the discard pile for whatever crap they want.
Yeah.
That's so strong.
So the reason why so many people are annoyed by the Vagabond in the game, and I actually know people who love Root, but say that they love Root and will not allow the Vagabond in their games of Root, is because they have so many ways to score points, and you don't get points for checking them.
Mm.
When the Vagabond gives someone a card, they get points. When they open up a ruin, they get points. When they remove a warrior from a faction that they're enemies with, they get a point for the warriors. If they remove cardboard from that faction, they get 2 points because the cardboard's already worth 1.
Which is a
And
lot. That
yeah,
is a
and
lot.
then they
Yeah.
also can complete these quests by just exhausting items in a clearing, and that gives them points. And
But
so,
not a lot. Not a lot of points. That
well, it
doesn't give you
actually
many points.
scales. It
Okay.
scales because your
If you do more in
first
a certain suit. Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the
But not a
quests
lot.
are probably, I wish that the quests were more the
They
way
should
that the
be
vagabonds score
yeah.
points
Yep.
because um it's also though the least interactive mechanism for the Vagabond.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you become super best buddies with another faction of the Vagabond, you can actually use that player's warriors.
Yeah. It's crazy.
However, usually a table will not let you become best buddies with a faction, because at some point that faction is going to smack you just so you don't win the game.
Yeah.
And if as soon as a Vagabond kills a warrior of a player, they can never give that player cards anymore. They are now enemies with that player. Now
Even if you do that.
you can kill buildings and tokens
Mhm.
and still be friends with somebody, which is hilarious.
It's ridiculous. And that's even if I'm not the one who initiates the battle. And I think that's an important piece of Vagabond, right? They care about what other people have crafted, but there are ways to interact and control what's happening with them. But you don't, beyond slowing them down, you don't get any reward for doing it. So that's where it's fraud.
Yes. And so a late game Vagabond can just go on a murderous rampage for points. But the reason that checking the Vagabond is so important is that when they take hits, they have to damage their items. And the only way to use damaged items is either by to fix them with a hammer, fix one item with a hammer, or to at the start of your turn, slip into a forest that's essentially outside the play space of the game, and then skip your entire turn to repair all of your items.
But you also can't be interacted with for your entire turn.
For sure. But if the whole board wants to check the Vagabond only gets to play every other turn.
Yeah. Yep.
Which we've both experienced in games of Root.
And I've also almost won a game where I only took every other turn as the Vagabond.
Right. That's and so why people don't like them is that they have so many ways to get points, and you don't get rewarded for stopping them.
Yeah.
However,
yeah.
they add an interesting element to the ecosystem because it's essentially a problem that the table has to solve, but nobody wants to be the one to solve it. And so for the politics of the game, they
Yeah.
add a lot of richness. But for a lot of players, it's not a fun richness that it adds to the game
Yeah.
because it's a chore.
Okay, so I get the sense that we both like the Vagabond.
I don't mind the Vagabond.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that I'm very happy that they're in the game.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that they're one of my favorite factions to have in the mix, but I'm not someone who would say the Vagabond is bad and should not be in the game. Like,
Sure.
I'm not that person. And I I have friends who the Vagabond is their favorite part of the game. And it's because it's a way to interact with the game that connects with them. And they can kind of play the Vagabond however they want. They could play a nice Vagabond. They could play a Vagabond that's just kind of running around and giving people cards and going on quests. Like, you can do that. It's not the most competitive strategy, but they add something so unique to a war game to have just this one piece that can have such an impact on the board. So I actually like the design of the Vagabond. I think probably with one or two rules tweaks, they could be something that people don't mind as much as they do that are competitive Root players. In fact, when you play the game in tournaments, they've made an optional rule for tournaments, the people who organize the tournaments, called Despot Infamy, which basically just says that if you remove enemy pieces in a battle, you get 1 point, not 1 point per piece.
I mean, it totally changes the whole game. But I do think it underscores the fact that the Vagabond, in the way that the decision space of the incentives as the game's published, are such that ultimately, I think to stay competitive on points, you have to turn into a murder monster at some point. Like, the swords have to be crafted, you have to get some swords, and then you have to go destroy buildings. And that's how you're gonna end up having a turn towards the end of the game where you're going to score 6 or so points and you're going to win the game with this little burst. You're going to be an annoyance for the first half of the game. Then you're going to be a problem that no one wants to solve for the next third. That's going to add up to more than a full, but whatever. For the final third of my whatever I just said, then you are enemy number one, and no one can stop you, more or less.
Well, the other thing that's funny is that everyone wants to craft the items because you get points for crafting them.
Yeah, but you're just giving them more
But
options. Yeah,
but when the Vagabond is in the game, I do not craft things until
yeah,
I become enemies with them.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
what the item you get the most points for crafting is coins.
Oh, so
And you
good.
need it's worth 3 points, and you need 2 crafting pieces and rabbit clearings to do it. 3 points is huge in Root.
One-third, 1/10 of your
It's
points.
1/10 of your points. However, coins are so good for the Vagabond if you craft them because it gives them more cards, and cards are huge for them. And it's just so funny what it does to the incentives of the game, where I just don't want to craft items if the Vagabond is not my enemy yet. Like, I just
Yeah.
don't.
Have you been in I do think that the Vagabond is interesting from the perspective of too that these items really matter, and one of the items is an item that lets you hold more items. There's this set collection. So the bag is
Mhm.
this really key piece that one makes you more durable because you can take hits to your bag and still use your other stuff. So the more bags you have, the more stuff you can have, but also the more hits you can take. But I've had games where I've played the Vagabond P2 where I just don't really get the bags I need, and then I kind of just don't ever get to do as much. So I think that's actually really important mechanically for the Vagabond because it lets you be in situations where you sort of are like, I don't have what I need. I'm not online. I can't do anything. Don't hit me yet. I'm not a problem yet. And they can say something that's true, that everyone knows is true, but might not actually play out that way in reality. And I think that that's important to the dynamics of, to your point, of having things that are uncertain at the table and squishy, and not just the known certainty of what's going to happen with the eyrie player on their turn, or the fairly known certainty of what's going to happen with the cat player. There's the Vagabond adds a degree of uncertainty that's just healthy for the game. I think I
Well,
love the Vagabond. I think it's great.
the other great thing about having the Vagabond in the game is that a lot of times you should just attack them in, like, the first turn of the game. Like
Yeah,
like, make them start. They're already, like, they start as, this weak little faction that can only, like, take 3 little actions. Just
yeah.
smack them up front, right? Hit them at the very beginning, because, like, that'll just make the game, and that's just such a funny thing. What's funny, Brendan, is you and I did an episode on whether games can be mean.
Hmm.
You, me, and Jake. We talked about
Yeah.
whether games can be mean. Do you think that Root is a mean game?
I don't know that Root is a mean game, but I think you can be really mean to each other in Root if you want to be. It's a high agency game. You could be pretty mean. You can do things that feel very unjust if you would like.
For sure.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's just it can hurt feelings, like for real. Like,
totally.
if people feel like you took a suboptimal action, which kind of
Yeah.
gets me at one of the elements of Root that can turn some people off. And by the way, I want to shout out from our Discord, uh, Luke and Krill and Hugo, who helped you and I get so many reps of this game in on the app in the last couple of weeks. Did you track how many games of Root we've played together in the
I
last couple
I
of weeks?
I didn't. Did you?
No, but it has to be
It's like one a
like
day, at least one and a
at
half a day.
least, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we played over a dozen games of Root in the last 2 weeks,
Yeah.
easily.
Yeah. I
And
think. Yeah.
so one thing that is interesting about Root is that it can have a real runaway leader problem if
If you don't talk.
players have different understandings of the
Mm,
board state,
yeah.
and if one person's suboptimal play can create a huge power vacuum that someone can seize.
Yeah.
And this is a highly competitive game. Like, it's crazy that for a game this zany that there's an active tournament scene for it. It's that tightly competitive, even though the actual mathematical balance of the game is not that tightly wound.
Yeah.
And it's because the table talk of experienced players creates a real highly competitive environment.
Yeah. The meta, right? So if we all know Root is not balanced, Root is not a balanced game. I don't think it was intended to be a balanced game, in any way, shape, or form. And if anyone wanted to argue otherwise, I think you're just barking up the wrong tree. Go play poker. But Root really illustrates the fact that, and I think this is important, right? The more political a game is, I've played games where there's a meta that develops outside of the game where you're all talking about what's strong and what's weak so that you can inform what people do when they end up in a tournament situation. But I've never played a game where what you do before informs the actual decisions that someone might make, right? Just because I think that a character is better or weaker, once I'm playing against them, it doesn't matter. What's functionally true is true. In Root, that is false. What matters is people's perception of what they can do at the table. So I'm incentivized to spend more time with the people I will play in tournaments en route. I don't play tournament route, but I would be to affect how people think of things and how they understand the game, so that when I'm playing the game with them, I can, and I want to do that in a way that's true. Because when I'm sitting with them, I want to be able to make an argument that feels grounded in reality, feels right, and helps actually incentivize action that's good for them and good for me. Because Root's all about having conversations where we find ways where we have common ground, we convince each other in some small exchange to take actions of mutual benefit in the short term, and hope in the long term we can find an edge elsewhere against that same player. That's all this is, right? It's roundabout, constant deal making. And there's times in which certain factions just don't have the pieces in the right places on the board to be able to interact or to be able to sort of talk with one another. The Vagabond finds himself completely on the wrong side of the board at the end of the game, right? Or the cats have been beaten back to the corner. And maybe you would say the game's already ended by then, but I think one of my critiques of Root that is when I feel the most frustrated is when the balance of pieces on the table, this is more for our next episode on Root, I guess. This is just a Root podcast now. 2 hours wasn't enough, y'all. We're just going to keep going. But I think that's when I feel the most frustrated, because I want to be able to see what's happening and do something about it if I can get everyone to see it with me. And that's why I like the otters.
So it's we should maybe note that um we're here at the end
Yeah.
of maybe this episode, but um we have mostly been playing this game on the Root digital app that's
Yeah.
on Steam and phones and whatnot, in an asynchronous way where we're doing our table talk in Discord between turns. Um, how much of this have you played Root at the table?
One time, a really long time ago.
Yeah. Would would you be eager to play this at the table?
100%. I would play Root every time I had a group of 4 people who understood how to play Root, who wanted to play Root.
Yeah.
Every time.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Um, it's so funny because I think that this game is pretty different from most games that have been deep dived on this podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
However, it is maybe, and I haven't played every game that you all have deep dived, but it's maybe one of the games that you could go deepest on
Yeah.
that you all
Well,
have covered.
for a lot of reasons. And I think there's for 2 really good reasons. One, Root is an incredibly complex game. There's a lot going on in this game. And we can distill Root to pretty simple terms, right? The move, the clearings, the build, etc. But there's a lot going on with every individual faction. There's a lot of timing considerations. There's a lot of cards to consider. There's a lot of nuance in this game. It's a complex game. Um, but also for the metagaming aspects that you just talked about, Pete. When the decision space is not a pure solution game, when it's a mixed solution game because there's humans involved, it just gets so deep. And I think that for me, Root really underscores that with these incredibly deep games like this, you're really encouraged to seek mastery through specialization. I think it's funny and cool that in the Root tournament space, and it surprises me zero, in the Root tournament space, people talk about their mains. Like I most want to play this because it is so deep. And because of this asymmetry, you are incentivized to get really good at one thing, but there's so much content and there's so many different versions and so many ways I can play this game that exploration is still fun. And I do think that's somewhat the secret sauce of highly asymmetric games, whether it's fighting games or Root or Civilization or MOBAs like Dota, is that the dream of fully understanding the game is always before you. But if you really want to win, you have to hit the vagabond. You got to specialize.
You
You
got to
just
smack it. You got to
y-
smack that little
yeah,
raccoon. Yeah.
totally. And you should get really good at one thing and pick a faction to just really understand all the nuances of, right? Understand why with the Woodland Alliance you might add the remaining card in your hand on your first turn to your supporters or not. Why you would do certain things based on everything that's happening at the table. And I think that's really cool. I don't know. I don't have
All right.
yeah.
I have a question for you. Is there a world where Jake enjoys Root?
Yes, yes, but I think that the world where Jake enjoys Root is a world. So Jake really doesn't like political games, right? He wants to do his thing and do it better than everyone else. And I think that Jake could get there, but there's no world in which Jake would spend the time getting there to get there, I don't think. And I do think at the end of the day, he's always going to find the ability for players to politic a little irksome. But I think if he's playing with a table of 4 people who are playing mostly optimal, he would love Root. Absolutely.
I was
But
thinking, yeah, for
yeah,
Jake, someone who loves things like
Castles of Burgundy.
metas and well,
Oh,
sure, but I'm
sure.
thinking
Magic the
like
Gathering.
right,
Yeah.
right, the Magic the Gathering type thing where you love metas in your games and you love striving to be competitive in a
Yeah.
game and understanding and mastering a game, that there's a lot that this game has to give you if you're willing to put in an incredible amount of work. Um, it's so I always find it so funny that Root is as successful of a game as it is. That this is
Yeah.
like in the Board Game Geek like top 30 games.
Mhm.
And when people post shelfies on like, you know, board game groups or on the board game subreddit, I am so shocked at how often Root is in that shelf surrounded by games that have nothing at all in common with Root. And obviously, this is because of the box, right? It's because the box looks like a game everyone wants to play. But I think
Well,
it's incredible that a game this complex
yeah.
and mean has connected with as many people as it has, because it feels to oppose so much of what the board game industry goes for these days.
Yeah.
It's not a game that gives you a lot of good feelings. It's not a game where you're building an engine that feels great to pop off. It's not, you know,
You're always
any
ripping
of
your
that.
hair out. Yeah.
It's a game that's constantly smacking you in the face.
Yeah.
And I think it's just so cool that it's as big as it is, because I want more games like Root to exist. And I don't just mean that I want every game to think they need cute animals in clothes, because I do think that Root probably started that trend. Uh, but it's that I want games where it's going to create this highly interactive social experience in a pretty heavy game that is incredibly rewarding.
And I'll take that even a step further and say I want games that have discrete, mechanically created identities for their players that are prescribed. They give people interesting relationships through about power at the table to explore through social interaction, right? For me, that's what Root does. And that's an area that even now, 7 years later, I don't think is all that explored. And there's good reasons why. You need a publisher who believes in a game for something this complex to invest in it with art like Kyle Farron's, which is not, this is incredible art. It's tough
I
to do.
mean,
The vision
yeah.
here, the amount of money that was spent, the amount of time, the talent, that goes down to the meeples, right? The whole presentation. It's not even just the imagery, the the drawings or the illustrations or the paintings. It's also the board game production value
Mhm.
that's en route. And it's not perfect. The player boards are kind of, but you know, it's really really cool. And I think that those two things together are the secret sauce. And I want more games that do the triumph of presentation, that really invest, have a clear vision, and bet on a game. Don't go broad, go deep. But also more games that do have this sort of prescriptive identities that create power dynamics at the table for you to explore, so that it is a stage play where you're being cast as a character and then you get to play that character. To me, Root is as much the resistance as it is risk.
Well, and what's so funny is that a lot of what you're describing
Yeah,
is present in like the historical war game scene,
sure.
where these more simulationist games, right? If we think
Yeah,
about Euro games are about a puzzle,
sure.
and his war games are a simulation.
Yeah. Yep.
And I think that Root has some factions have puzzly elements, right? But at the same time, it is a simulation like you've been talking about, where there are relationships that are given to the players
Yep.
and you're told to go play in that playground.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And at the end of the day, Even if I'm terrible with them, it is really fun to blow up a clearing.
So, listen, you have been binging Root for the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Are you
We're not
getting
stopping.
Are you
No.
getting tired of it? Is my
No,
question.
we have I've barely touched in preparation for this episode, I've really barely touched any of the expansion factions. I've played the otters once. I think they're so fascinating for
So
so many
cool.
reasons. And I played the crows a long time ago in like an async game on somewhere. And they were so fun. I was just hearing, Rage Against the Machine in my head the whole time. That was great. And I want to play more. If you would play with me, I would love to do another episode on all the expansion factions. And
Oh
I
my
think the
gosh.
audience would be ready for it. But if you want that, let us know, please, in the Discord, and let
there are
other
6 more factions that we could talk about.
Yeah, that's only 4 hours of podcast.
Yeah, okay. So, but we'll save so much time because people already know what the cards are like. So
It's true. But then we can talk about the expansion deck. That's really cool.
Well, obviously, we also have to talk about advanced setup and how much the faction draft changes
and
the
drafting.
game.
Oh my god, Pete! It's not midnight yet. Let's keep going.
Listen, I could obviously, and this is funny that this is a game that's so deep that there's entire YouTube channels dedicated to this game. There are podcasts dedicated to this game. Like, if first of all, if you don't know about Root and this is your first time anyone's telling you about it, like, I would say try it out. And I would honestly say that the app is a great way to dip your toes in without buying the board game. I think that the app is actually an exceptional app. It's a very good board game app. And
can I add something?
Yeah.
Do that with people that you know or people that are learning the game with you. I think Root is better when you're playing it with people of roughly equal skill. So if you're looking for people to play Root with, I bet because of this episode, there will be other people, especially around when it's released, looking to learn or play Root on our Discord, which you can find a link to in our show notes. So if that intrigues you, come look and find games in the looking for games section.
I will say this. Pete Wissinger, will run Root Bootcamp for anyone who wants to be put through that test. If you want to join our Discord and ping me and say, Pete, I need you to show me Root, I will have as many games going as people in our Discord want, and I will run a Root Bootcamp. So I'm just saying it right now, right? Root Bootcamp is open. I am your sergeant, and I'm going to whip you into shape, and we're going to do this. And Jake is probably going to hate that I'm going to try and turn his Discord server into a Root Bootcamp. But
let's do it. It's going to be a cat instead of a space meeple in no time. I think with that, come discuss this episode with us. Really, if you made it this far too, please leave a review of our show wherever you listen to our podcast. We'd be thrilled to read it out if it's a text review and we find it. Also, thank you to Hembry for our intro and outro song, Reach Out. You can find a link to our Discord in our show notes or on our website, decisionspacepodcast.com, where you should go to find really cool articles and strategy guides and past episodes and more. And also a link to our Patreon, where you can support Decision Space if you want more awesome episodes with Pete and myself, Brendan, like these, or Jake and Paul too. Pete, what's the final word?
The final word is Root is still my favorite game of all time, and I'm so excited to play more of it with you, Brendan. And yeah, that's what I got.
Vive la Woodland Rebellion. Bye,
Listen,
y'all.
I just can't wait till I talk for 30 minutes about the Badgers in our next episode. So anyway, goodbye, everybody.
Relics.